Great directors don't just appear out of nowhere. Along the way, many of them experimented with horror. Low-budget debuts, TV movies, oddities that slipped through the cracks. Today, we're digging up 9 such films made long before their directors found fame. Dementia 13 was Francis Ford Coppola's first feature, filmed in Ireland years before The Godfather made him famous. While working with Roger Corman, Coppola used leftover sets and props from another shoot and turned a $20,000 budget into a small Gothic horror. The story follows Louise Halloran, who hides her husband's sudden death to secure her place in the family inheritance. She schemes against her mother-in-law, but soon crosses paths with an axe murderer stalking the castle halls. At under 90 minutes, the film is no masterpiece, and reviews at the time were far from kind. But Dementia 13 offers some surprising moments for the production year of 1963. Especially noteworthy is the lively, suspenseful background noise. Before The Exorcist set off a wave of possession movies, Steven Spielberg quietly directed this made-for-TV horror. Something Evil tells the story of a couple, played by Darren McGavin and Sandy Dennis, who move into a country house that hides a demonic presence. The evil forces slowly tear at the family's emotions and target their young son, turning what looks like an idyllic home into a place of dread. Shot right after Duel had marked him as a talent to watch, the film gave Spielberg a chance to practice his craft. Strong family themes, ordinary Americana disrupted by menace, and camera work that added atmosphere without being flashy. As a production, it's modest and often shows its budget limits. One effect of a cracked windshield looks drawn directly on the film. Yet there are moments that work better than expected, like the eerie glowing eyes, staged years before the Amityville Horror. The movie sometimes stumbles when it tries to explain its demons with rules from books, but it remains striking as Spielberg's only direct attempt at supernatural horror. It's an unsettling early glimpse of David Cronenberg's fascination with body horror and the collapse of safety in everyday places. Shivers is set in a modern apartment complex where a parasite spreads from one resident to another, turning ordinary people into violent predators. The concept sounds simple, even a little absurd, but Cronenberg directs it with a sense of creeping dread. The film follows a protagonist who slowly realizes what is happening around him. Each attempt to escape is blocked by those he once trusted, and every hiding place is quickly uncovered. Shivers never received the attention it deserved, but it remains a striking horror film that's absolutely worth watching. Bad Taste was Peter Jackson's first feature, a wild sci-fi horror comedy where aliens invade a rural town to harvest people for their fast food chain. The film swings between over-the-top gore, absurd violence, and slapstick humor, living up to its title in every possible way. Shot on a shoestring budget, it relied on Jackson's friends not just for acting, but also for funding. Jackson himself plays Derek, one of the agents, as well as one of the aliens, throwing himself into both parts with gleeful chaos. The film doesn't aim for deep meaning. It's built on crazy visuals, ridiculous gags, and non-stop mayhem, but that's part of its appeal. It favors insanity over logic and chaos over order, embracing trashy, nonsensical mayhem that still manages to be compulsively entertaining. And it's almost unbelievable that the same director would go on to film The Lord of the Rings. Targets is a striking example of a director's debut that feels assured and serious from the very start. Peter Bogdanovich not only directed, but also wrote, produced, acted, and edited the film, working under Roger Corman, who gave him the chance to make anything he wanted if he used Boris Karloff for 2 days. Bogdanovich cast Karloff as Byron Orlock, an aging horror star who questions his relevance, and cleverly mixed in clips from Karloff's earlier films to expand his presence. Running parallel is the story of Bobby Thompson, a young Vietnam veteran whose frustration and disconnection lead him into a deadly rampage. The contrast between the fading era of classic horror and the arrival of real-world violence gives the film its edge. Unlike exploitation movies that chase shock, Targets treats its subject with restraint, following Bobby's decline step by step and showing his choices as disturbingly human. For a first feature, it's remarkably confident, and the themes it wrestled with in 1968 remain unsettlingly relevant today. Often called the Lost Carpenter film, Someone's Watching Me was actually made just before Halloween. Carpenter wrapped production on this TV movie only 2 weeks before starting his genre-defining classic, but it didn't air until a month after Halloween premiered in theaters. That timing, along with its television release, is part of why it remains one of his lesser-known works. Shot in less than 10 days, it still shows how effectively Carpenter could build suspense under tight constraints. The story follows Lee, played by Lauren Hutton, a young woman who moves to Los Angeles and soon realizes she is being stalked. Anonymous phone calls, creepy letters, and unwanted gifts escalate into her apartment being broken into and bugged. Instead of relying on a male savior, the film centers on a strong, independent woman fighting back against her tormentor, which makes it unusual in Carpenter's early career. Prior to churning out tense, action-packed, and socially charged dramas such as Zero Dark 30 and Detroit, Kathryn Bigelow displayed her skills in a more unsuspecting subgenre. In 1987, she directed Near Dark, a modern vampire tale released in the same year as The Lost Boys. While that film became a hit, Bigelow's more experimental mix of horror and Western elements slipped under the radar. It's a story where shootouts and gore sit side by side, framed by wide-open desert landscapes, and where vampires are portrayed less as monsters and more as cursed figures caught between violence and human emotion. The film's romance and empathy toward its characters gave it a fresh perspective that critics praised, even if audiences largely missed it in theaters. Commercially, it was a disappointment, but it remains a clever and stylish twist on vampire mythology. And it also showed Bigelow's command of tone and atmosphere long before she became one of Hollywood's most acclaimed directors. The Hand was Oliver Stone's third film and his second attempt at horror. Adapted from the novel The Lizard's Tale, it tells the story of a cartoonist who loses his hand in a car accident, only for the severed hand to take on a murderous life of its own. Michael Caine plays the lead, later admitting he only did the movie to pay for a new garage, but his performance adds bite to the absurd premise. The result is a mix of B-movie silliness and psychological tension, with Stone showing flashes of visual inventiveness despite the cheesy setup. Compared to his debut Seizure in 1974, this film feels more confident and controlled. And of course, it is not a classic, but Stone used the experience as a stepping stone to greater things. He got to make Salvador and Platoon next. Not quite a horror film, but it deserves mention as Tobe Hooper's first feature, made 5 years before he gained fame with The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Released in 1969, Eggshells is an experimental counterculture piece that mixes cinema verite, surreal imagery, and fragments of life inside a hippie commune. There are hints of science fiction, with a strange hyper-electric presence in the basement. But the film is more about mood and atmosphere than any clear story. For many years, Eggshells was considered lost, resurfacing only in 2009 and restored a few years later for release on a special edition of The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. It may feel dated and self-indulgent, but it gave Hooper a chance to experiment with rhythm, framing, and unsettling imagery at the very beginning of his career.